our live stream. So let's get the show on the road. We're going to have a great time. And please do prompt me with questions through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. I'll try and get to those questions as quickly as possible. Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheim. Today, we're discussing the importance of supporting and shaping America's future doctors and medical professionals with special guests, Joyce Hendricks, President and Chief Development Officer of the Hackensack Meridian Health Foundation in New Jersey, and Julie Davidson, Executive Director of the Oregon Medical Education Foundation. And a reminder to Zoom attendees that we will take 3 snap polls during the show. We'll announce results, and questions submitted through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen will be included in our discussion. Julie, Joyce, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. And I'm going to set you up. We're going to go first to you, Julie. Medical professionals are so important to civil society. If you don't have health, you have nothing. And medical professionals, doctors, nurses, medical technicians, the people who work to support those hospitals and those medical facilities are so vitally important. They also shape public health policy. They educate us on how to live healthier lives. Particularly during the pandemic, we saw the incredible impact and essential role that the medical profession has in the United States and globally. So we're taking this National Doctor Day to talk about how nonprofits support medical students. And Julie, could you talk a little bit about the scale of your operation and the work that you do to help us address the doctor shortage in the United States?
Sure. Thank you so much, Mark. It's wonderful to be with you today. And also, Joyce, thank you. The Oregon Medical Education Foundation's mission is to help solve this physician shortage by ensuring that our MD, DO, and PA students here in Oregon have what they need to not only survive medical school, but to thrive in it, and that all students graduate on time and ready to go and be those fresh reinforcements that we all need. The institutions here in Oregon that provide this have been doing an outstanding job at adapting to the changes of the pandemic in the last 2 years, but many of those students are still feeling extraordinary stress and in need of that wider network of support to ensure that none of them fall through the cracks. The foundation was started by the Oregon Medical Association 60 years ago, making it one of the oldest organizations focusing on healthcare nonprofit in Oregon. But it was really during the pandemic that a spotlight was shown on the challenges that all of our students are facing, even in a normal year. And so we've been working to raise both funds and awareness within our community to help get the students the help that they need. Our core program is scholarship-based. It's recognizing the leadership contributions that the students are already making to the field of medicine. But more than just the money, it comes with support finding a mentor, which is just an absolutely critical role in those students' lives, and connecting them to safe spaces to handle the mental health and the burnout challenges that they are facing, caused by the pandemic, but also because it's an incredibly stressful undertaking. As part of our wider support for students too, they have many basic needs that aren't getting met. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit later about the food insecurity, housing challenges, and just general financial struggles and stressors that these students are facing. But it's an incredibly competitive field, and many students want to pursue a career in healthcare, but really don't necessarily have that level playing field. So we're starting conversations and developing programs and connections to help those from non-traditional and underrepresented medicine backgrounds get the edge that they need, get the support that they need to successfully navigate that application process.
So if you take a look at the evolution of public health in the United States, one of the things that really strikes me is that in the early days of our nation, the people who got a medical education were people who could afford it, because it's very expensive. And so what you end up with is a group of professionals that are drawn from a very small group of people who have the wealth to afford that kind of trajectory. But that creates a limit on the health of our population, of our communities, right? So Joyce, how do we deal with that issue of trying to take advantage of the full talent, the full creativity of all Americans in order to ensure that the nation itself can be healthy and prosper in a way that finesses that barrier to accessing medical care, to becoming a medical professional. How do we deal with this? Is it just a matter of throwing more money at the problem?
Well, money always helps a lot, right? But there's so much more that goes into, becoming a physician. And just on Doctor's Day, I want to say thank you to all of the physicians out there in the world that might be listening to this. At the Hackensack Meridian School of Medicine, which is a very new school of medicine, it just started about 3 years ago. And so we decided to embark upon this journey to create the first new medical school in New Jersey in over 5 decades.
And one of the newest medical schools in the entire country.
That is correct. Thank you for mentioning that. I appreciate it. And it is a school based on, no matter where you come from, no matter your ethnicity, no matter your background, to be able to give you that opportunity to become a physician. And then how that helps in the communities is it embraces our model of our professional roots for the human condition, empathy towards suffering, excellence in medical care, and humility in service. So we're hoping that our diverse doctors of today will then connect out in the communities, among students and the community at large.
So the sensibility is, it starts with not necessarily research. It starts not necessarily with the human body, but instead it starts with an idea of service to people. And you are trying to establish a school that is based firmly in that sensibility. And in order to serve people, you want to have people who connect to the people that you serve, no matter what their geography is throughout New Jersey, or even indeed throughout the United States, no matter what the income level is of people, male, female, other, race, rural versus urban. You're trying to create a cohort of people who connect to the service side of the doctor's mission.
Absolutely. And one of the ways we're doing that is also, our school is based on the Human Dimension program, which is the cornerstone of the curriculum. And the Human Dimension program ensures that the students actually go out and work in the communities and meet, future patients in the communities. And they may look in someone's refrigerator and say, "You're a diabetic, these foods you should not have." So they actually go out and meet with those folks, work with them. And on the other side of it, the Human Dimension program, there is a mindfulness course for doctors to help them also make sure that they're handling themselves well, self-care, so that they can better take care of patients. So this is all part of our Human Dimension program.
Are we moving more toward a holistic idea? If you look at the medical profession, it's not just one thing. And you look at medical schools, it's not just one thing. There are certain schools that are looking for the Nobel Prize laureate, right? And that sort of research intensity. But in your school, Joyce, you're looking at the human service dimension. Julie, how do you, in Oregon, how do you see that balance between essentially two sides of one coin, right? The medical research and the treatment research and so on and so forth, and the human dimension of service, where you might be talking about the non-sexy preventive activities like diet or mental health and meditation and those kinds of issues. How do you see the relationship between those aspects of the medical profession?
That's a fantastic question, Mark. And I guess from the student perspective, they are called to go into medicine. It isn't something that they look at and say, well, I could do that. I could get a job there. They feel like they want to give back. And these are the most, some of the most intelligent, giving, caring people that I've ever had the privilege of getting to work with. And yet when they get into school, it's there's still not enough being talked about how to take care of yourself. There are wellness seminars, but in terms of, how they are able to first teach themselves how to find that balance before they can then teach others and coach others in that, it's really difficult. Our students too, they're in the classroom and then they go out into rotations, some of them in much different settings. I say they're going from, downtown urban Portland setting to another rural setting in Oregon. The conversations are very different. The questions, where their patients are coming from, what their background is, what their comfort level is with physicians is very different. And so we're finding that students have to be these incredible chameleons. And the medical schools here, the institutions here are so good at equipping the students to have many of these conversations, but it's still a learning process. And that's where, mentorship really comes in. If students are fortunate enough to find a mentor, they have someone to use as a sounding board and to help learn and guide those conversations better. And at the same time, they're learning to take care of themselves too. Burnout is very real among students. And, nearly 50% will graduate already having had those feelings. And that's just really tough, so this is the time for them to be not only learning how to take better care of themselves and sustain their energy levels throughout their education, but at the same time, they're trying to help their patients in the various communities do the same thing. And so they really need all the support that they can get to have those conversations.
We just completed a poll in which we said, what is the top resource that a med student needs while in medical school? And the top answer was financial assistance and scholarships. And the second answer was emotional and mental health resources, but it was really dwarfed by the idea of financial support. But that really doesn't tell the full story, because the financial support might not be just financial support to pay for tuition. It could be things like transportation. It could be things like housing. It could be other aspects. Joyce, how do you divide the needs that students have and diverse students have for your institution, and how do you fulfill those needs?
That's Mark. It's a great question, and Julie, thanks for your recent remarks. They were spot on. I have to say that there's the mental health piece, right? And I know that is not so much cost, but that can turn into cost. So we need to make sure that we eliminate the stigma associated with taking care of themselves mentally and physically, right?
There's kind of a macho thing that has crept into the medical profession, which I don't understand. It doesn't seem to have the benefit, right? I've heard people advocate for this kind of intensity, which is fine, but this idea of some sort of a macho trial by fire to the point of physical exhaustion, what other profession requires that?
None, right? Yeah, so it's also that we must pay attention to, and again, that's where our Human Dimension program does address some of that. And you're right about housing and and food and taking care of the medical students in other ways. But truth be told, we must continue to raise the bar on scholarships. It's where you start, right?
It's also not sexy to say that we're raising money to make sure that people can get to class or are properly housed. How do you deal with that? Because when you're talking to a donor, I would like to have a scholarship named in my name, right? Yeah. But I don't necessarily want my name attached to making sure that people have enough to eat or that they're housed close to the medical facility so that they can actually logistically make it in. So how do you deal with that as a fundraiser, professional fundraiser, where you're explaining to me that really the need here is a balanced need between the scholarship, but also the living expense? Or do you bundle that together in a program that includes both?
Yeah, exactly. So if you think about, going to your undergraduate, and when you get scholarships there, there are full scholarships to take care of, tuition, not just tuition and room and board and housing. So there can be those full scholarships to make sure that a student is fully supported. And I think we have to start doing much more of that at our medical schools and medical education. We have to treat medical school students exactly like we would treat undergraduate students and ask for full scholarships.
Medical students like we treat undergraduate students. So
Correct.
in other words, this distinction that somehow at a certain point, certain needs lapse, that's not realistic because we're still human beings and we still have probably the same kind of requirements.
That's correct.
Julie, how do you had referred a couple of times, you kind of kicked this idea of the mental health aspect off. Is what you're saying is that not only do we need to, in our treatment of others, consider the mental health aspects of treatment, which I think is gaining more and more acceptance, but also in the education of our doctors, we need to think about the mental health of doctors, of nurses, of medical professionals as we educate them and as we cultivate them.
Yes, and I think that the mental health, I mean, Joyce, you nailed it with your word stigma. There is still very much a stigma associated with speaking out, but that's exactly, we need to do everything that we can to normalize that conversation and to create safe spaces for students and our established physicians and PAs to be able to have those conversations and get the help that they need without worrying that they're going to have their license affected by that. And it really comes back to the cost of an education. It is incredibly expensive to go to medical school. The living expenses, the tuition, and the tuition itself has been rising at double the rate of inflation, which means it's doubling every 9 years, which is wild to me that that's happening. There's a tuition-free movement that's starting out, where there's only 7 schools, I believe, that have started that. But the scholarships that cover just the tuition and living expenses. We need more of those. The conversations around burnout, though, I mean, financial stress is the number one thing that is weighing on students' minds. Just a generation ago, students were graduating with $30,000 in debt, and now it's over $250,000 in debt. Students are putting off travel. They're putting off starting a family and buying a home because they're going to be saddled with this debt for a decade or more. And if they happen to partner up with someone who also has a large debt, I mean, there's so many things that they're not being able to do, and that's contributing to their burnout. And so it's very easy for students and physicians too to feel overwhelmed in all of that. It's not going to be an easy solution, but I think it does start with talking about it more and creating spaces for them to speak safely and freely.
So let me ask you both this question, and if you could also talk about your constituents as well. The question that Julie begs, if medical professionals are exercising careers that are all about the good of people, right, human health, it's really all about whether you're an X-ray technician or you're a medical doctor and general practitioner, whether you're a nurse or some other person who's focused on human health. This is really about a healthier, better civil society. So we're basically asking people to fund that commitment on their part, right? As if it is an investment in their own income. And I guess it is to a certain extent. But to what extent is this the kind of thing that is just such a social good that together we should collectively try to encourage that through our own investments as a community, either through government programs or through communal programs like this? Shouldn't we be helping people to enter this service role to others? And how does that work? I mean, can we really make colleges and universities free for those people who have that passion and that skill like they do in other countries? Joyce,
Mark,
what do you think?
Yeah, Mark, you bring up a really, really good point. And I think we're doing that right here today with your show, to be quite honest about it, because it is about making sure that people are aware. I can't tell you how many people I talk to that really aren't aware of the fact that there's a physician shortage, that they don't realize that primary care physicians are lacking, that people really don't understand what it's like to even be a physician, about the burnout, about people think physicians are God,
Well, but let's put a dimension into it, because there's no physician shortage in major urban areas for people who have good health insurance or who have a certain income. There's no physician shortage there. The physician shortage is completely in areas that are geographically dispersed and for people who have lower income, and that's pretty much 60% of the United States.
Yes.
I mean, it's the vast majority of our country, isn't it?
It sure is. And this is why it's so important to get more medical school students, supported, and making sure that they're coming from a diverse background and they're going to stay perhaps in their state or their regions where they're going to school. It's very critical. Again, this is, the nexus of this Hackensack Meridian School of Medicine, sorry. And, but you're also right about, the communities, and I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought.
Well, Julie, going to Oregon is a great case study, because Oregon has a couple of urban centers, and then it's a vast state. And there you also have this whole idea of, in certain areas, there's a concentration of doctors and medical facilities and hospitals and so on and so forth. And then in vast swaths of the state, there's not very much. How do you deal with that, so that in shaping your own programs, you're fulfilling a statewide need?
No, absolutely. That's a fabulous question. And Oregon is a really interesting and very diverse state when it comes to that urban-rural divide. The foundation, the Oregon Medical Education Foundation, works closely with the 5 institutions in Oregon. So we have OHSU School of Medicine, OHSU Physician Assistant Program, Comp Northwest, our DO school, and then 2 additional PA programs through George Fox and Pacific University. And those 5 schools go out of their way to pull students in from diverse backgrounds, particularly those who are from rural and underserved and underrepresented medicine backgrounds, to create cohorts that can learn from each other. And then they all have programs too that gets these students out on rotation into those areas and exposes them to the diverse needs of our state, and really does help coach and equip them to best serve those patients. Our scholarships, which is primarily what our primary program, helps with. We give the funds to the students for them to use as they see fit, and those, particularly the leadership scholarship, works to help retain students for Oregon. We want to support students who are committed to staying here and serving in those areas of the greatest need. A major challenge for those students, though, is because of the level of debt that they're having to take on. Many of them are not choosing primary care and rural service because they simply don't pay enough to pay down their debts fast enough. They're almost feeling forced to choose a more lucrative specialty, which means that this gap between physician shortage and not is actually, we're not making much ground there. So really trying to support the students who truly want to go back into those communities through the work that we do. And we're seeing, the institutions follow suit.
That's such a fantastic point. I'm going to bring Tim Johnston's question into this. He said, are there places in medical schools that go unfulfilled each year because of financial concerns? I thought the shortage of physicians was created by limited school capacity. Is that true? Is this created by limited school capacity, Julie or Joyce?
Some of it is, yes. I would say yes, because you may get 6,000 applications for, let's say, 200 spaces in a medical school. So, it's like any other education. So, again, it's why we started a medical school, so that, we're able to educate more future doctors.
So as part of our issue is that are we going to divert resources into education for the next level of doctor, or are we going to divert our resources into the specialty that is the highest compensated specialty for direct service so that we can pay off our medical debt, Julie? Isn't that part of the issue of the medical debt, right? If you have a medical debt, then you have to go into a specialty that pays the most. Education doesn't necessarily pay the most. And so again, we're creating this dynamic through our system that seems to perpetuate some of its dysfunction. No?
No, that's an excellent point, and there is definitely some truth to that. I think to tack on to Joyce's response too, we've got to remember we're coming out of 2 years of the pandemic here, and that limited the number of rotation spots that were available to students. You could not have as many bodies within the institutions in person as you could previously. And so now that restrictions are easing, more spaces for rotations are going to pick up. And really the class sizes, we've seen those diminish over the last couple of years because of the limited number of rotations on offer. I think the field of medicine, we talk about physician shortage, it's more than just a shortage of doctors. There's just a tremendous landscape of roles within healthcare. And we're actually seeing new programs pop up. Our George Fox that I mentioned a second ago just launched a year ago in January with an additional number of spots for students. So I think when we look at who can be filling those needs across the nation, we're looking beyond doctors as well to some of those other really critical roles. But it does come down to finances. And I think that, scholarships help, grants help, there are military programs that help provide the funding for that and get people in. But I think it really comes down to who is successful in navigating that application process. Joyce was absolutely correct. It's an incredibly competitive process for a limited number of spots. And if we're trying to create more of a diverse population in our physicians and PAs and others in medicine, how are we helping those who are from underrepresented medicine, underserved communities through that process? How are we leveling the playing field for them so that they have an equal shot at getting one of those spots, and then helping to improve that side of it as well, the patient care. The students that I speak with who are especially bilingual and from, say, a rural Spanish-speaking part of Oregon, they have such an advantage in terms of relating to the patients in those communities. Patients open up and speak to them in a different way. And it's just really critical that patients can see themselves represented in the field.
We're coming to the end of our time, so I'm going to give you, Joyce, a word, and then we'll go back to Julie. I have a question about this whole idea of diversity, because diversity is so often cast in terms of race or gender. But to me, I think that some of these points are inclusive of those definitions, but those definitions are just not sufficient. There are also the whole issue of interest in serving rural communities versus urban communities. There's interest in serving people who are poorer versus people who are wealthier. There's diversity in terms of condition, right? There is the preventative side. There could be high intervention cancer treatments or low intervention cancer treatments. There are all sorts of different conditions that we all suffer that require a whole set of different skills. How do we change our system so that diversity now is considered in all these different dimensions, and that we are creating a system that supplies the talent that is required to make America healthier along a broader front, right? I don't think that there's a particular one-shot answer, but I think that it is true that what we're doing right now is kind of inadequate to the challenge of making America healthier. Joyce, what do you think in terms of this? We understand, we're mindful of the fact that Hackensack has taken this very courageous step of creating this new medical school.
Yes, thanks, Mark. You're absolutely right about what you're saying in terms of the different populations and diversity being broader. Absolutely. And I think we have to make sure that we have these conversations about, service to the community, right? Serving the rural community, perhaps, or the urban communities, and how that's just as important as getting into a specialty. I think, these folks need to be kind of rewarded and praised for that kind of service to the community. They need to feel as good about themselves as, as one of the doctors that are doing top research. And we have to begin to have those conversations and really talk those folks up. They deserve it.
We have to break down those hierarchical divisions, for example, between nurses and doctors, or between different types of doctors, right? Because
Absolutely.
really it comes down to human health. One of the things that we've just asked is whether people select doctors on the basis of race, somebody who looks like them, and gender. It was very interesting. Race, nobody answered that they selected a doctor based on race, but gender was a really important issue. So Julie, I'd like to go to you and ask about that whole idea of, if we as men, women, people who identify as other, feel that somebody of our identity will be a better service provider, how do you ensure that we don't end up with a medical profession where the different types of service providers are dominated by one gender or another, so that if we have a condition, we can find a doctor that we are comfortable with based on our own orientation or gender identity? How do you deal with that to make sure that there's
No, that's a great question. Absolutely. I think first and foremost, the medical students, are chosen for, they're awarded a spot because they can care for patients. And being a physician, being a PA, being a nurse, or however you are working in healthcare, you need to be able to first and foremost care for patients. Everything else, I think, comes second to that. And being able to have the flexibility to work with patients from all backgrounds is so important. It's a given. In saying that, it's also really important that patients feel like they can trust that relationship and trust that they're going to get the best possible care. There are reports still of medical schools, not Hackensack, I'm sure, but other schools that are still not giving not giving accurate information about people from other races. There are so many myths, for example, around the Black community's tolerance for pain that are just inaccurate and out of date, and that is still being taught in school.
I was just talking with a science leader about the fact that because of the science and how the science has been developed by people with particular lived experience, the blood oximeter, the oxygen measurement devices, when they're applied to African American folks, generally underread the oxygen content, or overestimate the oxygen content in the blood, and we have people going home because of how the research was undertaken, simply because of a blind spot amongst the researchers who were predominantly white, right? So this whole idea of how lived experience and how different experiences can inform our research is so important, Julie. I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. I just thought that the example that you were bringing really did tie to a conversation just I had yesterday.
No, that's very timely. Thank you for that. I wasn't aware of that study. The lived experience is critical, but at the end of the day, for me, it comes second to being able to care for patients. And there's a responsibility for physicians to be able to care for a range of patients. And yet, we need patients to be able to trust their physicians and care providers and seek the care that they need. A lot of the more serious illnesses could be headed off if there was preventative care sought sooner. So I think that, starting with the medical schools, starting with how we recruit into medical schools, at a very early age, middle school, high school outreach programs, going into communities that have a greater need for physicians, and helping inspire those talented young kids to consider a career in sciences and healthcare. That's where it really starts. Our grant programs are just beginning to scratch the surface there. There's much more that we could do, but I think, there's going, we're at the start of a sea change there, but it is going to take a generation or so. I still unfortunately think it's going to take that long to see this really transform to where it needs to be. But there's just some incredible students. My favorite part of my job is to be able to speak with students on a regular basis and hear their stories and hear what calls them into medicine and hear their plans for caring for their communities. And they are just brilliant. And we're going to have a bright future of medicine thanks to them.
Well, this is where donors can make a real difference of creating a system that helps America be healthy. Joyce Hendricks, President and Chief Development Officer of the Hackensack Meridian Health Foundation, New Jersey, and Julie Davidson, Executive Director of the Oregon Medical Education Foundation. Please thank your staffs, your donors, your doctors, your nurses, your medical technicians, your students, your teachers. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. Stay healthy, and we're going to be speaking on Thursday about a really interesting topic. We're going to be talking about supporting the transgender community and some of the issues that are hitting the United States right now. So it'll be a very interesting discussion. Thank you so much.
Tune in. Thank you, Mark. Thank you,
yeah.
Julie.
Thank you. Thank
Have a
you,
great
Joyce.